So let's talk about how we might capture and deal with environment-specific data in our system. There's certainly going to be data that will be different in each environment, but we have to track. We may have objects such as security accounts, encryption keys, other types of structures that we want to store in a database. We want to keep in each environment, but they may have to change. For example, we may have encryption keys in development. They'll be slightly different in QA, even though it may be the same name. And the same object in production, again, is slightly different. If you have these objects for specific environments, what I really can recommend is you have a separate place in your repo where you keep these, and then separate build and deployment processes that will process this out. In this case, I've got specific code that I want to pull out and execute in each environment. And when I organize my repository, I might actually separate out the code that's going to go in each environment in a separate area. This allows me to have a separate build and deployment process for that code. May seem like overkill, may seem like a lot of work, but this does ensure that my deployment process is being tested because I can use the same deployment process even though I've got different object code, and that specific code might not be tested until I get to that environment. It gives me some repeatability and reliability, which is what I want in DevOps world. It's certainly an improvement over a strictly manual process, but kind of depend on the code and that there not to be any typos in that code. So in order to decide how I'm going to store this code, I have to think through how I'm going to build and release this, because that's going to dictate how I put this code together. Now in my release process, I may look at how I do my code. In this case, you can see that I've got Visual Studio Team Services up here, and I've got a release to my integration environment. That's two different steps. So one is I'm doing a deployment, and the second one is I'm running some PowerShell, which would deploy my encryption key or my other object. When I go to my QA environment, I may have a very similar process, but I'll need to pull code from a different place. I'll need to do it in a slightly different way. Maybe I still have the PowerShell code, but I do it the same way. And then when I get to production, perhaps I have still another way of doing it. So I still have a similar process. I'm still automating with the same types of tools, the same types of code, but I'll pull it differently, and I may actually have to deploy it differently. In this case, I'm doing an Azure deploy instead of one to a local SQL server. No matter how I'm going to store this code, I'm likely going to have to make these decisions based on deployment, and I'll have to manually store this. Typically, I'll have to manually use file save and file open to commit this code to a version control system and retrieve it. Now, if your IDE tracks these objects, your IDE does some work for you. It may help you, or you may have to add exceptions or filtering to prevent this from being included. As with all the other ideas in DevOps, you've got to do what works best for you.